A little orphan girl begged not to be adopted by a rich man after spending a day with him. The imposing courtroom fell silent as 7-year-old Brittany Adams's desperate cry pierced the air. "Please stop. I can't do this." Her small body trembled uncontrollably in the witness stand, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. The adoption hearing, which moments ago had been proceeding smoothly, ground to a sudden halt. Philip Mason, the wealthy businessman who had spent weeks preparing to welcome Brittany into his home, sat frozen in his chair, his expression a mixture of shock and concern. The stack of adoption papers before Judge Robert Williams remained unsigned, forgotten in the wake of the child's emotional outburst. "I don't want to be adopted," Brittany's voice cracked, her blue eyes wide with panic. "Not if it means leaving Denise behind. She's my sister not by blood but by heart. Please don't make me choose." The little girl's gaze darted desperately between Philip and 16-year-old Denise Evans, who sat in the back row, tears silently rolling down her face. The courtroom erupted in hushed whispers. Mrs. Linda Thompson, the social worker who had orchestrated this seemingly perfect adoption, shuffled her papers nervously, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Judge Williams leaned forward, his experienced eyes studying the scene before him: the distraught child, the stunned prospective father, and the teenage girl whose presence had just derailed what should have been a routine proceeding. "Your Honor," Brittany continued, her voice barely a whisper now, "everyone says I'm lucky to have Mr. Mason want to adopt me, and he is kind and good." She paused, choking back sobs. "But Denise saved me when I first came to Hope Haven. She helped me through nightmares, taught me to read, and promised we'd always be together. How can I be happy in a new home knowing I left half my heart behind?" The profound silence that followed her words was broken only by the gentle sound of Denise's footsteps as she moved toward the front of the courtroom, drawn by an instinct to protect her little sister. Judge Williams raised his hand, halting her advance, even as Philip Mason stood up, his face transformed by a realization that would alter the course of all their lives. "I believe," the judge announced, his voice grave, "we need to take a brief recess to reconsider what is truly in the best interest of this child." Hope Haven Orphanage stood on the outskirts of Boston, a weathered Victorian building that had sheltered generations of children within its faded blue walls. The 3-story structure, with its wrap-around porch and tall windows, carried both the dignity of age and the warmth of a well-loved home. Thick ivy climbed the eastern wall, and an ancient oak tree in the backyard provided shade for countless children's games and quiet moments of reflection. Inside, the worn wooden floors creaked with familiar comfort under the feet of 38 children who called Hope Haven home. The main hall, with its high ceiling and gentle natural light, displayed countless artwork created by residents past and present. Among these, Brittany Adams's vibrant paintings stood out, telling stories of hope and family in bold, emotional strokes. Eleanor Mitchell, the orphanage's librarian of 25 years, had transformed the library into more than just a room of books. With comfortable reading nooks, soft cushions, and strings of warm lights, it became a sanctuary for troubled souls. Her silver hair and kind eyes made her an approachable figure for children struggling to find their place. She kept detailed journals about each child, noting their progress, their struggles, and their triumphs, creating a written testimony of their journeys. The daily rhythm of Hope Haven followed a careful balance between structure and flexibility. Mornings began with shared breakfast in the large dining room, where round tables encouraged conversation and connection. The kitchen staff, led by warm-hearted Mrs. Rodriguez, made sure every child had their favorite meal on their birthday, a tradition that made each celebration special. Classes took place in converted rooms on the second floor, where dedicated teachers worked to provide education tailored to each child's needs. The art room, especially, became a place of healing and expression under the guidance of Mr. Thompson, himself a former resident of Hope Haven. His understanding of the children's emotional needs made him particularly effective at helping them process their experiences through creative expression. The dormitory rooms, though modest, allowed each child to create their own space. Personal touches, drawings, photographs, treasured possessions transformed institutional spaces into individual havens. The younger children shared rooms in groups of 4, while teenagers like Denise had double rooms, allowing for both companionship and growing independence. Hope Haven's staff approached their work with dedication that went far beyond professional duty. Night supervisor James Cooper often sat up with children who had nightmares, his deep voice reading stories until fears subsided. Nurse Sarah Bennett kept her office stocked with both medical supplies and comfort items, understanding that emotional wounds often needed as much attention as physical ones. The backyard, with its carefully maintained playground and garden, served as both recreation space and therapy area. Children learned responsibility by helping tend the vegetable garden, finding pride in growing food for their shared meals. The basketball court, though cracked and worn, hosted impromptu games that helped build relationships and trust among residents. What made Hope Haven special wasn't its facilities or programs, but the sense of family that flourished within its walls. Older children naturally took younger ones under their wing, creating bonds that often lasted long after they left the orphanage. Staff members celebrated every achievement, no matter how small, understanding that each step forward represented a victory over past trauma. Regular community events, holiday celebrations, talent shows, and family days opened the orphanage to the neighborhood, helping children maintain connections with the wider world while feeling secure in their temporary home. Local volunteers taught music lessons, helped with homework, and simply provided additional adult attention that each child craved. The building itself seemed to hold the stories of thousands of children who had passed through its doors, their laughter echoed in the halls, their hopes written in the marks on the walls, their dreams woven into the very fabric of Hope Haven. Despite its challenges, the perpetual need for repairs, the constant balance of limited resources, the orphanage remained a place where healing was possible and where new families could form in unexpected ways. Before finding sanctuary at Hope Haven, Denise Evans's early life had been a dark chapter written in pain and betrayal. Born to alcoholic parents in a small Connecticut town, her childhood memories were a kaleidoscope of violence, neglect, and desperate attempts to become invisible within her own home. Her father, James Evans, a former factory worker turned chronic drunk, had a temper that exploded at the slightest provocation. Her mother, Sarah, rather than protecting her daughter, retreated into prescription drug abuse, leaving 8-year-old Denise to navigate the treacherous waters of their household alone. The little girl learned early to read the signs of impending storms, the sound of beer cans being crushed, the slur in her father's voice, the vacant look in her mother's eyes. She became expert at making herself scarce, spending long hours in the public library where she found escape in books and kindness in the librarian who never asked too many questions about her bruises. The breaking point came during a bitter winter night when Denise was 10. Her father, enraged by a lost job and too many drinks, turned his fury on both wife and daughter. That night, neighbors finally called the police after hearing screams and breaking glass. They found Denise huddled in her closet, clutching her school books, the only escape she had ever known. Her mother lay unconscious in the kitchen while her father ranted incoherently in the front yard. The system that was supposed to protect her instead subjected her to a different kind of trauma. Bounced between 3 foster homes in 2 years, Denise learned that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. The first home seemed perfect until the foster father's lingering looks made her skin crawl. The second family returned her after 3 months, claiming she was too difficult because she refused to call them mom and dad. The third placement ended when the family's biological children began bullying her and the parents looked the other way. At Hope Haven, 13-year-old Denise arrived with walls built so high that even the most experienced staff members struggled to reach her. She excelled academically, keeping her head buried in books, but refused to participate in group activities or form connections with other children. Her file was marked with notes about being withdrawn, overly mature for her age and resistant to emotional attachment. The only person who seemed to understand her was Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell, the elderly librarian who recognized a fellow book lover. Through their shared passion for literature, Eleanor gradually earned Denise's trust. During quiet afternoons in the library, she would gently encourage Denise to talk about her feelings, using stories as bridges to difficult conversations. It was Eleanor who first noticed how Denise's hands would shake when adult men raised their voices, how she hoarded food in her room, how she positioned herself to always face the door. With infinite patience, Eleanor helped Denise begin the long journey of healing, teaching her that not all adults would hurt her, that her past didn't have to define her future. But the deepest wounds remained hidden: the belief that she was fundamentally unlovable, that anyone who claimed to care would eventually leave. These beliefs manifested in subtle ways: her refusal to participate in adoption events, her tendency to push away potential friends before they could reject her, her obsessive need to be perfect in school, as if academic excellence could somehow make up for her perceived unworthiness. Then came Brittany, a tiny whirlwind of need and fear that broke through every barrier Denise had built. In helping the younger girl heal, Denise found her own path to recovery. Brittany's unconditional love and trust became a mirror, showing Denise a different reflection of herself, not as the broken, unwanted child of her past, but as someone capable of giving and receiving love. Yet even as she flourished in her role as Brittany's protector, Denise carried deep-seated fears. Every time a potential family showed interest in Brittany, every time there was talk of adoption, the old terror of abandonment would resurface. She knew that at 16 her own chances of adoption were virtually non-existent, but the thought of losing Brittany to a real family awakened all her childhood demons. These fears would soon collide with events that would test every lesson she had learned about love, trust, and the true meaning of family. Brittany Adams arrived at Hope Haven on a stormy night when she was just 4 years old, clutching nothing but a worn teddy bear and a photograph of a woman she could barely remember. Her small frame seemed even tinier in the oversized donated pajamas as she stood in the entrance hall, rainwater dripping from her blonde curls. The circumstances of her arrival were shrouded in mystery. Her file contained only basic information and vague references to family tragedy. Her first weeks were marked by nightmares and tears. Her tiny frame curled into a defensive ball whenever anyone approached. During the day, she would hide in small spaces under beds, behind bookshelves, in closets, emerging only when absolutely necessary. The staff tried their best, but nothing seemed to breach the walls of trauma the young child had built around herself. That changed the day Denise Evans, then 13, heard Brittany's muffled sobs from the common room. While other teenagers avoided the new arrival, Denise recognized something in those tears, an echo of her own past. She sat silently beside Brittany's hiding spot behind the bookshelf, humming a gentle lullaby her grandmother had once sung to her. Day after day she returned, sometimes reading stories, sometimes just being present, until gradually Brittany began to emerge from her shell. Their connection deepened through small moments: Denise teaching Brittany to tie her shoelaces, braiding her blonde hair each morning, helping her sound out difficult words in storybooks. When Brittany had nightmares, it was Denise's bed she sought out, not the night staff's office. The age gap that might have created distance instead formed a perfect balance: Denise's protective maturity complementing Brittany's innocent ability to find joy in simple things. The orphanage staff watched in amazement as both girls transformed through their relationship. Brittany's fear gave way to a bright, curious personality that could light up a room. Her natural artistic talent began to emerge, first in simple crayon drawings, then in increasingly sophisticated artwork that captured both the pain of her past and the hope of her present. Her paintings, filled with vibrant colors and emotional depth, showed a sophistication far beyond her years. They became inseparable, their daily routines intertwined like a choreographed dance: breakfast shared over whispered secrets, homework sessions where Denise played teacher, evening walks in the orphanage garden, where they imagined adventures and planned their future together. Their favorite spot was an old oak tree in the garden's corner, its branches creating a natural hideaway. Here they built their own world, complete with its own traditions. Every Sunday, they held what they called their sister ceremony, sharing a cookie saved from lunch and making grand promises about their future together. "When I grow up," Brittany would declare, "I'm going to build us a house with a library bigger than the whole orphanage." Denise would smile, adding her own dreams to their shared vision. The staff came to rely on their unique dynamic when new children arrived, particularly the most traumatized ones. Brittany and Denise worked as a team to help them adjust. Brittany's innocent approach would often get the first smile, while Denise's gentle guidance helped them find their place in the Hope Haven family. Their bond became a source of hope for other children, proving that family could be found in the most unexpected places. Even as potential adoptive parents began showing interest in Brittany, she remained fiercely loyal to her chosen sister. During home visits or meetings with families, she would inevitably turn the conversation to Denise, explaining proudly how her big sister had taught her to read or helped her overcome her fear of thunderstorms. Each time a family's interest waned upon realizing the depth of this attachment, Brittany seemed almost relieved, while Denise battled guilt over potentially holding her little sister back from a real family. Yet their bond continued to strengthen, built on countless small moments of trust and understanding, whether sharing the last cookie from dinner, practicing dance routines in their room, or comforting each other through the hard days when memories of their past lives surfaced. They faced everything together. In a place where uncertainty was the only constant, they had created something rare and precious, a relationship that went beyond the traditional boundaries of family, founded on choice rather than chance, love rather than obligation. Philip Mason's life was defined by a single moment 3 years ago, the day he lost his 8-year-old daughter Sarah in a devastating car accident. Once a vibrant, successful business executive known for his ambitious projects and corporate achievements, he became a shadow of himself, haunted by the empty halls of his expansive Boston mansion. Sarah had been his world, the light that gave meaning to his long hours at the office and his driven pursuit of success. Born late in his life after years of fertility treatments with his late wife Emma, who passed during childbirth, Sarah was the miracle he never thought he'd have. Her infectious laugh, her passion for painting, and her habit of leaving sticky notes with drawn hearts around his office made every day brighter. The accident happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Philip had promised to pick Sarah up from her art class, but got caught in an important business meeting. He called his regular driver to get her instead. 10 minutes later, a drunk driver ran a red light, and in an instant his entire world shattered. The guilt of not being there, of prioritizing work over his daughter, became a weight he carried every day. After Sarah's death, Philip threw himself into work with a desperate intensity, as if building bigger buildings and closing larger deals could somehow fill the void she left behind. His home office remained exactly as it was the day she died, her artwork still pinned to the walls. Her last note, "Love you, Daddy," still stuck to his computer monitor. The room became both a shrine and a reminder of his failure as a father. His transformation wasn't just internal. The once gregarious businessman became known for his solitude. Board members whispered about his sudden need to visit children's hospitals, his generous donations to youth art programs, his quiet visits to playgrounds where he would sit and watch families for hours. Some suggested he needed therapy, others wondered if he would ever recover. The turning point came during a charity event at Hope Haven Orphanage. Philip had been invited as a potential donor, expected to write a check and make a polite appearance. Instead, he found himself drawn to the children's art display in the main hall. Among the drawings, he spotted one that could have been Sarah's, the same bold colors, the same joyful style. The artist was a 7-year-old girl named Brittany. For the first time in 3 years, Philip felt something stir in his heart, not just the familiar pain of loss, but a flicker of hope. In Brittany's artwork, he saw not just echoes of Sarah, but the possibility of healing, of giving another child the love he still had to offer. Yet his initial interest in adoption wasn't entirely pure. There was a part of him that saw Brittany as a chance to recapture what he had lost with Sarah. What Philip didn't expect was how this decision would force him to confront his own unresolved grief and question his motivations. That the journey ahead would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and the true meaning of family. It would require him to open his heart not just to one child, but to the possibility that healing comes in unexpected forms, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to love again, even when that love looks different from what we initially imagined. His mansion, once a mausoleum of memories, stood ready for new life. But first, Philip would have to learn that replacing what was lost was not the same as healing, and that sometimes the family we need is not the one we initially set out to create. His journey from grief to hope, from loneliness to family, would intertwine with the stories of two sisters in ways he could never have anticipated. As he began the adoption process, Philip's heart remained tethered to Sarah's memory, even as it tentatively reached out toward a new future. He would soon discover that true healing might require him to expand his vision of family beyond what he'd lost, to embrace a love that was different, but no less real than what he'd known before. The autumn morning when Philip Mason first visited Hope Haven Orphanage started like any other. Children rushed through breakfast, staff members reviewed schedules, and Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell arranged her library books with methodical precision. Nobody suspected that this ordinary Tuesday would set in motion events that would challenge their understanding of family and love. Philip arrived precisely at 9 a.m., his tailored suit and polished shoes marking him as different from their usual visitors. Linda Thompson, the lead social worker, greeted him with practiced enthusiasm, already mentally calculating the donation potential of this wealthy businessman. But Philip's demeanor surprised her. Instead of the usual rushed inspection wealthy donors preferred, he asked to spend time observing the children in their natural routines. In the playroom, chaos reigned as it always did during free time. Younger children chased each other with toy cars, while older ones huddled over board games or books. Philip stood quietly at the edge, his eyes scanning the scene with an intensity that made some staff members uncomfortable. Then he spotted her, a small blonde girl sitting cross-legged by the window, intensely focused on her drawing. Brittany didn't notice Philip's approach, too absorbed in her artwork. She was creating a colorful scene of two girls holding hands beneath a rainbow, her tongue stuck out slightly in concentration. The similarity to Sarah's artistic style struck Philip like a physical blow, the same bold color choices, the same joyful energy radiating from the page. He had to take a moment to steady himself against the wall. "That's a beautiful drawing," he finally said, his voice slightly hoarse. Brittany looked up, startled but not afraid. Her blue eyes met his with a directness that reminded him painfully of his daughter. "Thank you," she replied, then added with the unfiltered honesty of childhood, "You look sad. Would you like to draw too? Drawing helps when I'm sad." The simple offer cracked something in Philip's carefully maintained facade. He found himself sitting on the floor beside her, accepting a slightly crushed crayon. As they drew together, Brittany chatted about her art, her favorite colors, and her dreams of becoming an artist someday. Each word, each gesture seemed to echo Sarah in ways that both hurt and healed. From across the room, Denise watched the interaction with growing concern. She had seen this before: wealthy visitors becoming enchanted with Brittany's charm, seeing only the sweet, artistic child without understanding the depth of her needs or the importance of her existing bonds. Denise's hands clenched involuntarily as she observed Philip's obvious emotional response to her sister. As the morning progressed, Philip learned more about Brittany through careful questions to the staff, her background, her progress at the orphanage, her special bond with Denise. Linda Thompson, sensing his interest, emphasized Brittany's artistic talents and sweet nature while glossing over what she considered complications, particularly her attachment to the teenage resident. During lunch, Philip watched as Brittany automatically saved half her dessert and carried it to Denise, the two girls sharing a private smile that spoke of countless similar moments. He saw how Denise gently wiped a smudge of chocolate from Brittany's cheek, how their interaction flowed with the natural rhythm of long-established trust. Before leaving, Philip requested a private meeting with Mrs. Thompson in her office. Surrounded by filing cabinets containing the stories of countless children, he made his intention clear: "I'm interested in providing a home for Brittany," he stated, his voice firm despite the emotion evident in his eyes. What would the process entail? Linda Thompson's professional smile couldn't quite hide her excitement. A wealthy single father with obvious emotional investment was a rare opportunity. She pulled out the necessary forms, eager to begin the process before Philip could change his mind. As she detailed the steps: background checks, home studies, supervised visits, she deliberately minimized mentions of Denise, treating the girl's attachment as a minor obstacle to be overcome. Rachel Thompson sat in her sterile office at the Department of Child Services, methodically reviewing Denise Evans's file with a practiced eye that seemed to search for flaws rather than potential. 20 years in the system had left her with deeply entrenched beliefs about older children in foster care, and Denise's case particularly troubled her. "Another troubled teenager," she muttered, highlighting passages about Denise's early trauma and defense mechanisms. Her bias wasn't just professional, it was personal. 15 years ago, Rachel had attempted to adopt a teenage girl, only to have the placement end catastrophically when the child's unresolved trauma led to destructive behavior. That experience had hardened her heart against older adoptees. The Brittany Phillip adoption case should have been straightforward: a wealthy, caring man offering a stable home to a young, adaptable child. Instead, it had become complicated by what Rachel viewed as an unhealthy attachment between the girls. Her reports began to reflect this perspective, subtly at first, then with increasing conviction. "Subject demonstrates concerning codependent behaviors," she wrote in one assessment. "Relationship with younger residents shows signs of inappropriate emotional dependence." Each observation was carefully worded to raise red flags while maintaining a veneer of professional objectivity. Rachel systematically built a case against Denise's influence, transforming natural sisterly affection into something that seemed almost sinister. During her weekly visits to Hope Haven, Rachel began documenting every interaction between the girls with a critical eye. When Denise helped Brittany with homework, it became academic over-reliance. When they shared private jokes, it was exclusionary behavior patterns. Even their tender moments were reframed as evidence of isolation from peer relationships. Her campaign extended beyond paperwork. In meetings with other staff members, Rachel would drop carefully crafted comments about the dangers of trauma bonding and the importance of fresh starts in adoption cases. She scheduled private sessions with Brittany, asking leading questions designed to expose any negative influence from Denise. The turning point came when she discovered Denise's hidden past: a brief incident at her second foster home where she'd lashed out during a panic attack. Rachel seized upon this information like a prosecutor presenting evidence, conveniently overlooking the context of Denise's trauma and subsequent years of growth and stability. Her crusade became more overt when she learned that Philip Mason was considering maintaining contact between the girls after the adoption. She arranged an urgent meeting with him, armed with carefully selected case studies and statistics about failed adoptions involving continued connections to foster siblings. "Mr. Mason," she began, her voice carrying the weight of assumed authority, "I understand your desire to ease Brittany's transition, but maintaining ties with Denise could seriously jeopardize the attachment process. These kinds of relationships often become toxic as children age." Even Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell, the librarian who had known both girls for years, found her attempts to defend their relationship dismissed. "With all due respect, Mrs. Mitchell," Rachel would say, her tone condescending, "your emotional attachment to these children may be clouding your professional judgment." Rachel's influence began to spread through the system like poison. Other social workers, trusting her experience, began to view the situation through her distorted lens. The narrative shifted. What had once been seen as a beautiful example of siblings supporting each other became a case study in problematic attachments. She took particular satisfaction in noting how her interventions were affecting Denise, the teenager's increasing frustration and desperate attempts to maintain contact with Brittany were documented as evidence of instability rather than natural reactions to forced separation from a loved one. The atmosphere at Hope Haven changed subtly but unmistakably as Philip's visits became more frequent. Each time his expensive car pulled into the driveway, a ripple of tension would spread through the building. Staff members exchanged worried glances, aware of the growing complexity of what had initially seemed a straightforward adoption case. During these visits, Philip carefully orchestrated one-on-one time with Brittany, often in the art room where they would spend hours drawing together. He found himself opening up about Sarah for the first time in years, sharing stories about her love for painting and her dream of becoming an artist. Brittany listened with rapt attention, her own artistic enthusiasm mirroring his lost daughter's in ways that both comforted and haunted him. Meanwhile, Denise watched from the sidelines, her concern growing with each passing day. She noticed how Philip's eyes would glaze over slightly when Brittany mentioned her name, how he would subtly redirect conversations away from any mention of their sisterly bond. During group activities, he positioned himself between the girls, creating a physical barrier that felt increasingly intentional. Linda Thompson encouraged this selective attention, scheduling Philip's visits during times when Denise was occupied with her studies or chores. In their private meetings, she emphasized Brittany's need for a fresh start, and suggested that her attachment to Denise, while sweet, might hinder her ability to fully bond with a new family. One afternoon during an art session, Brittany created a family portrait that included herself, Philip, and Denise. When she proudly showed it to Philip, his reaction was subtle but telling. His smile tightened slightly and he gently suggested drawing another version, this time focusing on just the two of them. Brittany's confusion was painful to witness, her small hands clutching both drawings as she tried to understand why she couldn't have both versions of her family. Eleanor Mitchell watched these developments with mounting alarm. During a quiet moment in the library, she found Denise curled up in her favorite reading nook, pretending to study but really watching Brittany and Philip through the window. "They're trying to make her forget me," Denise whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "But how can they expect her to be happy when they're cutting away half of her heart?" The other children at Hope Haven picked up on the tension, their natural instincts attuned to the emotional undercurrents of their home. Some of the younger ones started bringing small gifts to Denise's drawings, craft projects, saved cookies as if trying to compensate for what they sensed she was losing. The older residents watched with knowing eyes, too familiar with the system's tendency to prioritize convenient solutions over emotional bonds. The situation came to a head during a group dinner where Philip was invited to observe Brittany in a more natural setting. Throughout the meal, Brittany constantly turned to Denise for reassurance, sharing inside jokes and seeking her approval. Philip's frustration became increasingly evident in his rigid posture and forced smiles. After dinner, he requested another private conversation with Mrs. Thompson. "I understand that Denise has been important in Brittany's life," he began diplomatically, "but for a successful adoption, don't you think we need to help Brittany develop more independence, to form new attachments?" Linda Thompson seized this opening, producing reports and studies about the importance of clean breaks in adoption cases. She painted Denise's influence as potentially problematic, suggesting that her age and background might not provide the best role model for Brittany's development. That evening, new rules were quietly implemented. Denise found herself assigned to different activity groups than Brittany, their shared meal times were reduced, and their beloved evening reading sessions were interrupted by various tasks and responsibilities. The systematic separation was subtle but relentless. Denise confronted Mrs. Thompson about these changes in her office, her voice trembling with barely controlled emotion. "You're trying to make Brittany forget me," she accused, "but you don't understand we need each other." The social worker's response was professionally cold. "Denise, you're old enough to understand this is about Brittany's future. Don't you want what's best for her?" These words haunted Denise as she lay awake that night, listening to Brittany's muffled sniffles from across the room. The younger girl had been told she couldn't sleep in Denise's bed anymore, another new rule. The physical distance of mere feet felt like miles, a preview of the greater separation looming on the horizon. Philip remained oblivious to the emotional toll his focused attention was taking. He saw only what he wanted to see: a little girl who reminded him of his lost daughter, a chance to rebuild the family he had lost. When Brittany's artwork began to show darker themes, figures standing apart, rain clouds over separated people, he attributed it to the natural anxiety of transition rather than the pain of forced separation from her sister. As autumn deepened into winter, the pattern continued. Philip's visits increased in frequency while Denise's time with Brittany decreased proportionally. The orphanage staff, following Mrs. Thompson's lead, began treating the eventual separation as inevitable, speaking to Brittany about her new life, and to Denise about letting go. Yet beneath this orchestrated separation, the bond between the sisters remained unshaken. They found ways to communicate through notes hidden in library books, through quick hugs in passing, through silent glances that carried the weight of their shared love and fear. Neither Philip nor the staff realized that their efforts to break this connection were only strengthening the girls' determination to remain sisters, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Eleanor Mitchell watched the situation unfold with growing distress. She had seen similar scenarios play out before, but never with children who shared such a profound connection. During quiet moments in the library, she would find drawings Brittany had hidden between book pages, always of two figures together, never apart. Denise's weekly book selections shifted to stories about sisters and unbreakable bonds, as if seeking reassurance in literature that what they shared couldn't be erased. The other children at Hope Haven began to react to the forced separation in their own ways. Some acted out during Philip's visits, creating distractions that allowed the sisters brief moments together. Others became protective of Denise during Brittany's absence, trying to fill the void with their own companionship. Even the youngest residents seemed to understand that something precious was being threatened. The staff's attempts to maintain normalcy grew increasingly strained. Activity schedules were constantly revised to keep the girls apart, mealtimes were staggered, and supervision was increased during their few remaining shared moments. The artificial nature of these arrangements created an atmosphere of tension that affected everyone in the orphanage. During one particularly difficult evening, Brittany broke down during art class when asked to paint a picture of her future family. Her sobs echoed through the halls as she tried to explain through tears why she couldn't complete the assignment without including Denise. The art teacher, moved by her distress, attempted to intervene with the administration but was quickly reminded to maintain professional boundaries. As the first phase of separation drew to a close, the emotional cost became increasingly evident. Brittany's once vibrant artwork grew muted, her natural joy dimmed. Denise's academic performance, once exemplary, began to slip as she spent her energy trying to maintain any connection with her sister. The very qualities that had made them both shine, their capacity for love, their resilience, their ability to support each other, were being systematically undermined in the name of proper adoption procedure. The day Brittany left for her trial stay at Philip's mansion was wrapped in a heavy December fog that seemed to mirror the emotional haze surrounding the departure. Her small suitcase contained carefully chosen outfits, her art supplies, and hidden beneath her sweaters, a photo of herself and Denise that she had refused to leave behind. Philip's home, a sprawling Victorian mansion in Boston's prestigious Beacon Hill neighborhood, should have been every child's dream. The room he had prepared for Brittany was a masterpiece of childhood fantasy walls painted in soft pastels, a canopy bed with silk curtains, and an art studio corner complete with an easel and natural lighting. Yet as Brittany stood in the doorway clutching her suitcase, the grandeur felt overwhelming rather than welcoming. The first few days followed a carefully planned schedule. Philip had taken time off work, determined to make the transition smooth. They spent mornings in the art studio, afternoons exploring the mansion's extensive gardens, and evenings watching movies in the home theater. Each activity was meticulously designed to create new memories, to help Brittany envision this as her forever home. But the silence in the massive house was deafening. Brittany found herself speaking in whispers, her footsteps echoing in halls that seemed to stretch endlessly. At night, the unfamiliar shadows and creaks of the old mansion sent her heart racing, but she had no Denise to crawl into bed with, no comforting arms to chase away the fears. During meals in the formal dining room, Brittany would unconsciously save portions of her dessert, only to remember there was no one to share them with. She caught herself turning to make comments to a sister who wasn't there, the empty space beside her a constant reminder of what was missing. Philip noticed her struggle but interpreted it through the lens of his own past. When he found Brittany crying in the garden, he assumed she was processing the transition and offered her new art supplies to lift her spirits. When she grew quiet during their activities, he filled the silence with stories about Sarah, not realizing that each tale only highlighted the absence of the person Brittany really wanted to talk to. One evening, while Philip was on an urgent business call, Brittany explored Sarah's old playroom. The space was preserved like a museum, filled with toys and books that hadn't been touched in years. Among Sarah's belongings, she found a diary filled with entries about wanting a sister. The irony of the situation, being chosen to fill the role of a lost daughter while being separated from her own sister, wasn't lost on her young mind. The breaking point came during an art therapy session arranged by Mrs. Thompson, who visited regularly to monitor the placement. Brittany was asked to draw her new family. She created a beautiful picture but broke down crying when asked to explain why there was a shadowy figure in the background. "That's Denise," she sobbed. "She's always there, even when you can't see her." At night, Brittany would sneak to the mansion's phone, trying to call the orphanage to speak to Denise, only to find the line secured with a code. She began hiding pieces of her artwork, drawings of two girls holding hands, of shared hearts, of the oak tree at Hope Haven under her mattress, afraid they would be seen as resistance to her fresh start. Philip's well-meaning attempts to create new traditions only emphasized the loss of old ones. When he suggested they have a special Sunday breakfast ritual, Brittany couldn't help but think of the sister ceremonies she and Denise used to share. Each new experience was tainted by the absence of the person she longed to share it with. As the trial period progressed, Brittany developed a quiet resilience. She learned to smile at appropriate times, to express gratitude for Philip's generosity, to participate in the activities planned for her. But those who looked closely could see the light in her eyes dimming, her artwork becoming more muted, her laughter less frequent. Mrs. Thompson reported the trial period as progressing satisfactorily, noting Brittany's compliance and Philip's dedication. She deliberately overlooked the signs of emotional distress, focusing instead on the material advantages and opportunities this placement offered. Her reports back to Hope Haven painted a picture of successful adjustment, even as Brittany's hidden drawings told a different story. The magnificent mansion, with all its luxury and promise, had become a gilded cage. Each passing day reinforced what Brittany already knew in her heart, that no amount of material comfort could compensate for the loss of the emotional shelter she had found in her sister's love. As the trial period drew to a close, the question wasn't whether she could adapt to this new life, but whether she could survive being only half of who she truly was. Back at Hope Haven, Denise's world had become a study in calculated isolation. The staff, influenced by Rachel Thompson's reports, began treating her with a cautious distance that felt like a silent accusation. Her previous role as a trusted helper with younger children was quietly discontinued, her responsibilities redistributed to others without explanation. The library, once her sanctuary, became the only place where she could maintain some semblance of normalcy. Eleanor Mitchell watched with growing concern as Denise spent hours documenting everything in a worn notebook, every interaction with Brittany, every shared moment, every milestone of their relationship. It was as if she feared these memories might be erased if she didn't preserve them on paper. "They're making me sound dangerous," Denise confided to Eleanor one rainy afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. She had just overheard two staff members discussing Rachel's latest report, which characterized her emotional response to Brittany's absence as concerning behavioral instability. The teenager who had spent years building trust and opening her heart was watching that trust crumble under the weight of professional suspicion. Her school performance, once exemplary, began to falter. Teachers who had praised her academic focus now noted her distraction, her tendency to stare out windows, her half-finished assignments. When questioned, she couldn't explain how the complex equations or historical dates mattered when her sister was being systematically removed from her life. The nights were the hardest. Without Brittany's presence, the old nightmares from her early childhood began to resurface. She would wake in panic, reaching for a sister who wasn't there, the empty space in the room echoing with absence. The night staff, once sympathetic, now recorded these episodes as further evidence of her emotional instability. Rachel Thompson's influence grew more pronounced with each passing week. New rules appeared, specifically designed to limit Denise's influence on other residents. She was moved to a single room for privacy, though everyone understood it was really for isolation. Her mealtimes were rescheduled, her activities separated from the younger children, her movements subtly but constantly monitored. During one particularly difficult counseling session, when Denise tried to explain the depth of her bond with Brittany, the therapist hand-picked by Rachel focused instead on age-appropriate peer relationships and healthy boundaries. Her genuine distress was reframed as manipulation tactics, her tears dismissed as attention-seeking behavior. The other children at Hope Haven watched this transformation with confusion and fear. Some, especially the younger ones who had benefited from Denise's care, tried to maintain contact, despite the new rules. They would slip her notes, share quick hugs in passing, or save treats from their meals, small gestures of loyalty that the staff increasingly discouraged. Eleanor Mitchell attempted to advocate for Denise, presenting years of positive documentation about her influence on other children, her growth, her healing. But her voice was drowned out by Rachel's professional assessments and clinical terminology. "We're watching a system destroy exactly what it should protect," Eleanor confided to her private journal, feeling helpless as she witnessed Denise's increasing isolation. The final blow came when Rachel suggested that Denise's attachment issues might be better addressed at a specialized facility. The recommendation was presented in careful, professional language that masked its cruel intent to remove Denise entirely from Hope Haven, severing her last connection to Brittany's world. In moments of solitude, Denise would sit beneath the oak tree where she and Brittany had shared so many sister ceremonies. She kept their tradition alive, saving cookies that would never be shared, writing letters that would never be shared, writing letters that would never be delivered. The other residents reported seeing her there late at night, talking to the stars as if they could carry messages to her sister. Her resistance took quiet forms. She continued to excel in art class, creating pieces that always included two figures, sometimes obvious, sometimes hidden in abstract patterns. She maintained a secret diary of all the things she wanted to tell Brittany, hoping they would someday be reunited. She learned to navigate the new rules while holding on to her truth, that love wasn't a pathology to be cured, but a strength to be protected. Yet each day brought new challenges to this resolution. The weight of constant surveillance, of being treated as a threat rather than a sister, began to wear on her spirit. The system that had once promised to protect her was now using her past trauma against her, turning her capacity for love into evidence of dysfunction. Rachel Thompson's campaign against Denise entered a new, more aggressive phase as she began compiling a comprehensive case for permanent separation. In her private office, surrounded by carefully selected case studies and highlighted incident reports, she crafted a narrative that would transform a loving sister relationship into something that demanded immediate intervention. Her reports grew bolder with each submission. She began documenting incidents that never occurred, arguments that never happened, manipulation that existed only in her imagination. One particularly damaging report claimed Denise had deliberately sabotaged Brittany's relationships with potential adoptive families before Philip, a complete fabrication that nonetheless found its way into official records. During supervised visits between the girls, Rachel would scrutinize their every interaction, interpreting innocent gestures through a lens of suspicion. When Denise helped Brittany tie her shoelaces, it became fostering unnecessary dependence. Their private jokes were labeled as exclusionary behavior designed to isolate BA from peers and potential adoptive resources. The most damaging allegations centered around Denise's past trauma. Rachel expertly wove together isolated incidents from Denise's early years in the system, creating a narrative that suggested she was emotionally unstable and potentially dangerous. A panic attack from 6 years ago became violent tendencies, while her protective instincts toward Brittany were reframed as obsessive attachment disorder. These reports began circulating through the child welfare system, gaining momentum and credibility with each passing hand. Social workers who had known and trusted Denise for years found themselves questioning their judgments. Even Hope Haven staff members began treating her differently, watching her interactions with Brittany more closely, their trust eroded by Rachel's carefully constructed lies. Philip Mason received carefully selected excerpts from these reports during his meetings with Rachel. "Mr. Mason," she would say, her voice filled with manufactured concern, "I feel obligated to share some troubling patterns we've observed." She would then present her evidence, each point designed to make him question the wisdom of maintaining any connection between the girls after adoption. The impact on Denise was devastating. She began noticing the changed attitudes, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the way other staff members no longer left her alone with younger children. Her confusion turned to hurt, then to anger as she realized her reputation was being systematically destroyed. Brittany, too young to understand the adult machinations around her, nevertheless felt their effects. She noticed how adults would tense up when she and Denise were together, how their precious moments were increasingly interrupted by staff members citing various rules and regulations. Their once natural relationship began to feel scrutinized and heavy with unspoken tensions. Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell attempted to challenge these reports, presenting her own observations of the girls' positive relationship. However, her protests were dismissed as emotionally biased and lacking professional distance. Her decade of experience working with children was deemed irrelevant in the face of Rachel's supposedly scientific documentation. The false reports reached their crescendo when Rachel submitted a comprehensive evaluation recommending immediate separation. She cited escalating concerns about psychological manipulation and potential long-term emotional damage to B.A.'s development. The report was a masterwork of deception, weaving together actual events, misinterpreted interactions, and complete fabrications into a compelling narrative of danger. This report landed on the desk of Judge Robert Williams, who would eventually preside over Brittany's adoption hearing. Rachel knew that planting these seeds of doubt early would influence the final outcome. She included phrases like professional consensus and established patterns of behavior, lending false authority to her personal vendetta. Other children at Hope Haven, picking up on the adults' changed attitudes, began to distance themselves from Denise. The isolation only served to reinforce Rachel's narrative about her supposed instability. Each tear of frustration, each moment of righteous anger became another piece of evidence in the case against her. The impact of Rachel's campaign began to ripple through the broader Hope Haven community. Staff members who had worked at the orphanage for years found themselves caught in an increasingly uncomfortable position, torn between their direct experience with the sisters and the mounting pressure from official channels. The maintenance man, Mr. Jenkins, who had often found Denise reading stories to Brittany long after bedtime, began accidentally misplacing negative reports about their interactions. The children at Hope Haven mounted their own quiet rebellion. During art classes, they created countless drawings of Denise and Brittany together, flooding the hallway bulletin boards with images of sisterly love. The younger ones would deliberately seek out Denise for help with homework or comfort after nightmares, defying the new restrictions with innocent persistence. Even the teenagers, typically absorbed in their own concerns, began keeping watch during the sisters' brief moments together, creating distractions when staff members approached. Eleanor Mitchell transformed her library into a secret communication hub. Books became hiding places for notes between the sisters, their spines marked with tiny dots that only the girls understood. She documented everything meticulously, keeping a separate set of records that told the true story of their relationship, a counter-narrative to Rachel's fabrications. Local teachers who worked with Hope Haven residents began noticing the changes. Mrs. Anderson, who taught art at the nearby elementary school, was particularly concerned about the shift in Brittany's artwork. The once vibrant pieces had become increasingly somber, filled with shadowy figures and separated pairs. She began keeping samples of Brittany's work, sensing they might someday be important evidence of the emotional impact of forced separation. The neighborhood around Hope Haven, long supportive of the orphanage, started asking questions. Regular volunteers noticed the changes in atmosphere, the new restrictions, the growing sadness in both girls. Mrs. Chen, who had taught piano at the orphanage for 15 years, began extending her lessons deliberately, creating extra time for the sisters to be in the same room, even if they couldn't interact directly. Some of the parents who had adopted from Hope Haven in the past reached out to express their concerns. They remembered how Denise had helped their own children adjust during the adoption process, how her gentle guidance had made the transition easier. Their letters of support, though carefully filed away by Eleanor, were systematically ignored by the administration under Rachel's influence. The local church group that regularly visited Hope Haven began incorporating themes of family bonds and unconditional love into their programs, a subtle protest against the forced separation. Reverend Matthews, who had known both girls since their arrival, made pointed references in his sermons to the importance of chosen family and the wisdom of children's hearts. Even the staff members who had initially accepted Rachel's assessments began to question the official narrative as they witnessed the impact of separation on both girls. The night supervisor noticed how Brittany's nightmares had returned with increasing frequency. The kitchen staff saw how both girls were eating less, their usual enjoyment of shared meals replaced by quiet sadness. The school tutor reported a sharp decline in both girls' academic performance, despite their previous excellence. A small group of staff members, led by Eleanor, began meeting secretly to document their observations and concerns. They kept detailed records of the girls' interactions, noting the natural, healthy nature of their bond and the destructive effects of forced separation. These unofficial reports, carefully hidden from Rachel's scrutiny, would later become crucial evidence of the truth behind her manipulated narrative. The community's resistance, though largely quiet and unofficial, created an undercurrent of tension at Hope Haven. Rachel's authority, while officially unchallenged, began to feel less absolute as more people witnessed the real impact of her policies. Small acts of defiance multiplied schedule adjustments that allowed the sisters to pass in hallways, conveniently timed distractions during supervised visits, unofficial messages passed through a network of sympathetic staff and residents. Yet despite this growing resistance, Rachel's official power remained formidable. Her reports continued to shape the official narrative, her recommendations carried the weight of professional authority, and her influence extended deep into the system that would ultimately decide the sisters' fate. The community's support, while meaningful, seemed powerless against the machinery of bureaucracy that Rachel had so carefully manipulated. The morning after learning about Denise's impending transfer, Brittany refused to touch her breakfast. Her untouched bowl of oatmeal sat cooling on the table, a silent protest that would soon escalate into something far more serious. "I won't eat until they let Denise stay," she declared, her small voice carrying a determination that surprised even the most seasoned staff members. Days passed, and Brittany's hunger strike continued. She would sit at meals, hands folded in her lap, watching as others ate around her. The only thing she would accept were water and occasionally small sips of juice when the medical staff insisted. Her usual vibrant energy dimmed, replaced by a ghostly pallor that grew more concerning with each passing day. Philip Mason, arriving for his scheduled visit, found a very different child than the one he had begun to know. Brittany's artistic corner in her room lay untouched, colored pencils gathering dust. Her newest sketchbook remained blank, a physical manifestation of her fading spirit. When he tried to engage her in their usual drawing sessions, she simply shook her head, her once bright blue eyes now dull with exhaustion and determination. "Please, Brittany," he pleaded, "you need to eat. You're making yourself sick," but his words fell on deaf ears. Brittany had learned from Denise that sometimes silence was the strongest protest, and she wielded that lesson with devastating effectiveness. Her quiet resistance spoke volumes about the depth of her love for her sister and her willingness to fight for their bond. The medical staff at Hope Haven began raising serious concerns by the 5th day. Brittany's blood sugar levels were dropping dangerously low, and her small frame couldn't afford to lose more weight. They spoke in hushed tones about the possibility of forced feeding, a prospect that horrified everyone who knew the trauma it could cause. Rachel Thompson attempted to use the situation to her advantage, documenting Brittany's behavior as evidence of Denise's harmful influence and manipulation. But her arguments began to ring hollow as staff members witnessed Brittany's independent determination. This wasn't a child being manipulated, this was a sister fighting for her family with the only weapon she had. The physical effects of the hunger strike became increasingly apparent. Brittany's once boundless energy disappeared, replaced by long periods of listlessness. She spent hours curled up in corners, clutching her worn sketchbook like a shield. Dark circles appeared under her eyes, and her clothes began to hang loose on her frame. Staff members tried everything to convince her to eat. They prepared her favorite meals, brought in special treats, even arranged for a child psychologist to speak with her. But Brittany remained resolute. "Denise is my sister," she would say whenever anyone tried to reason with her. "If she goes away, part of me goes too. How can I eat when half of me is missing?" The other children at Hope Haven watched with a mixture of awe and fear as Brittany's protest continued. Some tried to sneak her food, worried about their friend's health, but she gently refused their offerings. Her resolve began to inspire a quiet rebellion among the other residents, who started their own forms of protest, refusing to participate in activities, writing letters to the administration, creating art pieces depicting the sisters together. Eleanor Mitchell, watching Brittany's decline with growing alarm, documented everything meticulously. She knew that sometimes the most powerful evidence comes not from official reports, but from the raw truth of a child's actions. Each day she photographed Brittany's untouched meals, recorded her weight loss, and noted the increasing desperation in her behavior. By the end of the first week, Brittany's condition had deteriorated significantly. During art therapy, instead of creating her usual colorful pieces, she could only manage weak pencil sketches, all of them showing two figures being torn apart. Her teachers reported that she could barely concentrate in class, often staring blankly out windows or falling asleep at her desk. The breaking point came when Brittany fainted during a routine fire drill. The sound of her small body hitting the floor echoed through the hallway, bringing everyone's worst fears into sharp focus. As the medical staff rushed to her aid, Denise broke ranks and ran to her sister, cradling Brittany's head in her lap and sobbing apologies for not being able to protect her. Philip Mason, called to the orphanage during this crisis, arrived to find both girls in the infirmary. The sight of Brittany, pale and weak in the hospital bed, with Denise holding her hand and whispering encouragement, forced him to confront the reality of their bond. This was no simple attachment that could be smoothed over with time and distance. This was a vital connection that, when threatened, could drive a child to such desperate measures. Philip Mason sat in his home office late into the night, surrounded by copies of Rachel Thompson's reports, his business instincts awakened by inconsistencies he couldn't ignore. The sight of Brittany in the hospital bed had shaken him to his core, forcing him to question everything he thought he knew about the adoption process. "Something isn't right here," he muttered, comparing dates and testimonies. His years of corporate experience had taught him to recognize patterns in documentation, and Rachel's reports showed clear signs of manipulation. Determined to uncover the truth, Philip began reaching out to his network. He hired private investigators to look into Rachel's professional history, contacted other orphanages where she had worked, and began interviewing Hope Haven staff members away from the facility. Each conversation revealed new layers of deception. A breakthrough came when he discovered Rachel's personal connection to a failed teenage adoption 15 years ago. The investigators' report detailed how that experience had left her deeply biased against older child adoptions, influencing her professional judgment in ways that violated ethical standards. Eleanor Mitchell proved to be an invaluable eye in the investigation. During a clandestine meeting at a small cafe, she provided Philip with years of documentation about Denise and Brittany's relationship. "These are the real reports," she said, sliding a thick folder across the table. Reports that Rachel conveniently omitted or altered in her assessments. The evidence was damning. Where Rachel had documented controlling behavior, Eleanor's notes showed countless instances of selfless support. Claims of manipulation were contradicted by clear evidence of healthy, mutual emotional growth. Most disturbing were the direct alterations of incident reports, where Rachel had changed dates and details to support her narrative. Philip's investigation extended to Riverside Youth Center, the facility where Rachel planned to transfer Denise. What he discovered chilled him: a pattern of using transfers to separate siblings, always justified with carefully worded psychological assessments. Several former residents had similar stories of being separated from younger siblings during adoption processes. But working late into the nights, Philip began building a comprehensive case. He created timelines, cross-referenced documents, and gathered statements from other professionals who had worked with the girls. The picture that emerged was clear: a systematic campaign to destroy a legitimate and healthy sibling bond. A conversation with Hope Haven's night janitor, Mr. Jenkins, revealed more. "Miss Denise, she's the one who stays up reading to the little ones when they have nightmares," he shared. "And Brittany, that child, was terrified of the dark until Denise helped her through it. Now they help other scared kids together. That's not manipulation, sir. That's family." Philip's corporate training in detecting fraud proved unexpectedly useful. He noticed patterns in Rachel's language that suggested predetermined conclusions rather than objective observation. Reports were structured to build a specific narrative, with contradicting evidence consistently omitted or reframed. During his investigation, Philip found himself confronting his own motivations. Had he been so focused on recreating his lost family that he'd willingly accepted Rachel's distorted version of events? The realization was uncomfortable but necessary. One particularly disturbing discovery was a pattern of similar separations in Rachel's past cases. Other sibling groups had been divided using nearly identical justifications, always wrapped in professional language about healthy attachments and fresh starts. The long-term impacts on these children had never been followed up. As Philip dug deeper, he uncovered communications between Rachel and certain adoption agencies that suggested a broader systemic issue: older children were being systematically separated from younger siblings to make the younger ones more adoptable, all justified with carefully crafted psychological assessments. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Philip discovered Rachel had suppressed positive reports from other professionals. Evaluations from teachers, counselors, and medical professionals that supported the healthy nature of the girls' relationship had been deliberately excluded from official files. Philip brought his findings to Judge Williams in a private meeting. "Your Honor," he began, spreading the evidence across the judge's desk, "I believe we have a serious case of professional misconduct that has nearly destroyed 2 young lives." The judge's expression grew increasingly grave as he reviewed the documents. The scope of Rachel's deception became clear when Philip compared her reports with security footage from Hope Haven. Incidents she claimed to have witnessed couldn't have occurred as described, as camera footage showed the girls elsewhere at those times. Eleanor provided additional context through years of journal entries she had kept about the children in her care. Her detailed observations of Denise and Brittany's relationship development stood in stark contrast to Rachel's allegations of manipulation and control. Most compelling were the testimonies Philip gathered from other children at Hope Haven. Their stories painted a picture of 2 sisters who not only supported each other but helped create a more nurturing environment for everyone in the orphanage. 10-year-old Tommy spoke about how Denise and Brittany had helped him overcome his fear of the dark. 8-year-old Sarah described how they would include other children in their activities, creating a sense of family for everyone. As his investigation neared completion, Philip realized he hadn't just uncovered professional misconduct, he had documented the systematic destruction of a family bond by someone whose past trauma had corrupted their judgment. The evidence would not only challenge Rachel's recommendations but potentially change how sibling relationships were evaluated in the adoption system. Philip assembled a team of child welfare experts to review the evidence. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a leading child psychologist, provided expert testimony about the importance of maintaining sibling bonds in foster care. "What we're seeing here isn't codependency," she explained. "It's a healthy, supportive relationship that has helped both girls overcome significant trauma." Former Hope Haven residents began coming forward with their own stories. Marcus Thompson, now 25, shared how Rachel had orchestrated his separation from his younger sister a decade ago. "She destroyed not just our relationship," he testified, "but our ability to trust the system meant to protect us. I never saw my sister again." Eleanor Mitchell's network of former colleagues began sharing similar stories, tales of siblings separated through manipulated reports and rushed transfers. Each case bore Rachel's distinctive fingerprints, masked by professional jargon and psychological terminology. The pattern was unmistakable, and the damage was devastating. Philip hired child advocacy lawyers who specialized in sibling rights cases. They began preparing legal arguments that would challenge not just Rachel's immediate decisions but the broader system that had allowed such bias to influence the lives of vulnerable children. The lawyers focused on establishing a pattern of misconduct that went beyond a single case. Support for the sisters began growing within the legal community. Several judges who had presided over similar cases came forward, expressing concern about how Rachel's reports might have influenced their past decisions. Legal precedents were researched, showing successful cases where sibling bonds were protected despite non-biological relationships. The preparation extended beyond legal arguments. Philip's team gathered medical evidence showing the physical and emotional impact of forced separation on both girls. Brittany's declining health, documented through hospital records and doctors' testimonies, provided powerful evidence of the trauma they were enduring. Denise's academic records were compiled, showing her positive influence on younger children and her role as a mentor at Hope Haven. Teachers provided statements about her maturity and responsibility, directly contradicting Rachel's portrayal of her as unstable and manipulative. The team also focused on Philip's transformation, documenting his journey from seeking a replacement for Sarah to understanding the true meaning of family. His willingness to challenge his own preconceptions and fight for both sisters became a powerful testament to the possibility of healing and growth. Eleanor organized the Hope Haven staff who were willing to testify. Many risked their positions to speak out against Rachel's practices, providing first-hand accounts of how she had manipulated reports and ignored evidence that didn't fit her narrative. Their courage in coming forward added credibility to the case. As the legal preparation intensified, Philip converted his home office into a war room, walls covered with timelines, testimonies, and evidence. The magnitude of what they were undertaking became clear. This wasn't just about two sisters anymore, but about challenging a system that had failed countless children. Through social media, Philip located Marcus Thompson, now 25, who had been separated from his younger sister under Rachel's recommendation 10 years ago. She destroyed not just our relationship, Marcus shared in a recorded testimony, but our ability to trust the system meant to protect us. I never saw my sister again. The pain in his voice, still raw after a decade, spoke volumes about the long-term impact of forced separation. Eleanor introduced Philip to Grace Peterson, a former social worker who had resigned in protest over one of Rachel's separation cases. Grace provided internal memos showing how Rachel had systematically dismissed concerns raised by other professionals about the impact of sibling separation. She had a way of making anyone who questioned her methods seem unprofessional, Grace explained. We were all afraid to speak up. The scope of the investigation expanded as more cases emerged. A pattern of facilities like Riverside Youth Center being used as convenient dumping grounds for problematic older siblings became clear. These institutions often had limited resources for maintaining family connections, effectively ensuring permanent separation. Former residents described how visitation rights were systematically restricted, phone calls monitored, and letters lost in the system. Through court records, Philip discovered that Rachel had testified in numerous adoption cases, consistently advocating for sibling separation under the guise of fresh starts and healthy attachment formation. Her testimony had influenced dozens of judicial decisions. A former Riverside staff member revealed how children transferred there often arrived with similar paperwork, all bearing Rachel's distinctive assessment style, all justifying separation from younger siblings. The evidence mounted altered reports, suppressed positive evaluations, manipulated incident records. Each case added to a damning picture of systematic abuse of professional authority, all serving a personal vendetta against older foster children. Dr. Martinez's analysis revealed a disturbing pattern in Rachel's assessments. Normal sibling behaviors were pathologized, protective instincts were labeled as controlling, and emotional bonds were described as unhealthy attachments. Philip's team discovered a network of complicit administrators who had enabled Rachel's practices. Emails revealed how certain adoption agencies prioritized clean cases, young children, without complicated family ties, leading to pressure to separate siblings. Financial incentives were uncovered, showing how agencies received higher placement fees for younger children adopted individually. The investigation revealed how the system's emphasis on quick adoptions and fresh starts had created perverse incentives. Social workers were evaluated based on placement numbers, not long-term outcomes. Siblings who wanted to stay together were labeled as difficult to place, their bonds seen as obstacles rather than strengths to be preserved. Eleanor's decades of experience proved invaluable in understanding the broader context. She had witnessed the shift in child welfare philosophy, from supporting family bonds to prioritizing quick, clean adoptions. Her records showed how policies had gradually changed, making it easier to separate siblings under the guise of professional judgment. The most disturbing revelations came from interviewing other social workers who had worked with Rachel. Many described feeling pressured to conform to her assessments, fearing professional retaliation if they challenged her conclusions. A pattern emerged of careers being sidelined and reputations damaged when professionals advocated for keeping siblings together. Medical professionals began speaking out about the trauma of forced separation. Dr. Sarah Anderson, a child psychiatrist, provided research showing the long-term psychological impact on separated siblings. "We're creating attachment disorders in the name of preventing them," she testified. "The system is causing the very trauma it claims to be preventing." As the investigation deepened, it became clear that Rachel's actions, while extreme, had been enabled by systemic failures. Oversight was minimal, appeals processes were complicated and expensive, and there was no effective way to track long-term outcomes for separated siblings. The system had become so focused on processing cases efficiently that it had lost sight of its fundamental purpose: protecting children's well-being. Philip compiled the findings into a comprehensive report documenting not just individual cases, but the pattern of behavior that connected them. The document revealed how one person's prejudice, hidden behind professional credentials, had torn apart countless families. More importantly, it exposed the systemic weaknesses that had allowed this to happen repeatedly over many years. The county courthouse buzzed with tension on the morning of the hearing. Judge Robert Williams's courtroom was packed beyond capacity, filled with Hope Haven staff, former foster children affected by Rachel's decisions, and members of the press who had caught wind of the explosive case. At the center of it all sat Brittany and Denise, holding hands so tightly their knuckles had turned white. Philip Mason stood before the court, his corporate polish replaced by passionate determination. "Your Honor." He began, his voice steady despite the emotion beneath it. "What we present today isn't just about two sisters. It's about a systematic abuse of power that has torn apart countless families under the guise of professional judgment." Rachel Thompson sat at the opposition table, her usual confident demeanor showing cracks as Philip's legal team began presenting their evidence. The first blow came from Eleanor Mitchell, whose testimony chronicled years of healthy interaction between the sisters, supported by detailed documentation that contradicted Rachel's reports. "I've watched these girls grow together," Eleanor testified, her voice carrying decades of experience. What MS Thompson labels as unhealthy dependency is actually one of the most beautiful examples of sibling support I've seen in 30 years of childcare. Denise helped Brittany overcome severe trauma through patience and love, while Brittany gave Denise a reason to trust again. The court fell silent as Philip's team presented video evidence showing Rachel's reports were fabricated. Security footage from Hope Haven revealed that incidents she claimed to have witnessed couldn't have occurred as described. Dates didn't match, locations were wrong, and her observations contradicted recorded reality. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a leading child psychologist, provided expert testimony about the importance of sibling bonds in foster care. Separating these sisters wouldn't just be cruel. She explained it would be psychologically devastating. Their relationship isn't codependent, it's a crucial support system that has helped both girls thrive despite significant trauma. The most powerful moment came when Marcus Thompson, a victim of Rachel's previous separations, took the stand. Now an adult, he described the lasting impact of being separated from his younger sister. "I never saw her again," he testified, his voice breaking. MS Thompson's report said it was for the best, that I was a negative influence. I was 13, my sister was 8, we were all each other had. Rachel's cross-examination of witnesses grew increasingly desperate as her carefully constructed narrative crumbled. When she attempted to dismiss Eleanor's documentation as emotionally biased, the judge himself interrupted, pointing out that emotional investment in children's welfare was hardly a negative quality in childcare professionals. Philip's testimony marked a turning point in the proceedings. He described his own journey from seeking to replace his lost daughter to understanding true family bonds. "I came to Hope Haven looking for a child to fill a void," he admitted. "Instead, I found two sisters who taught me that family isn't about replacing what's lost, it's about opening your heart to new love." The courtroom stirred as Philip announced his intention to adopt both girls. "Your Honor, I'm not just asking to adopt Brittany anymore. I'm asking for the chance to keep a family together, to give both these extraordinary young women the home they deserve. Denise isn't a complication to be removed, she's an essential part of the family I hope to build." Brittany's testimony, though brief, moved many to tears. She described her hunger strike not as manipulation but as the only way she knew to fight for her family. "Denise is my sister," she said simply, "not because someone told us we were, but because we chose each other. Why is that less real than being born sisters?" Throughout the proceedings, evidence of Rachel's pattern of separating siblings continued to mount. Case after case was presented showing nearly identical language in reports, similar justifications for transfers, and a clear bias against older siblings in foster care. Her methodology, once examined in detail, revealed a disturbing pattern of personal prejudice masked as professional judgment. The fabric of false evidence against Denise began subtly, like cracks spreading through a foundation. Rachel Thompson sat at her desk late one evening, carefully crafting a report that would forever alter the course of two sisters' lives. Her computer screen glowed with half-truths and manipulated observations, each word chosen to paint a picture of dysfunction where none existed. Observed subject DE, exhibiting controlling behaviors during mealtime, she wrote, transforming Denise's loving habit of saving treats for Brittany into something sinister. Subject appears to be using food sharing as a means of maintaining psychological control over younger resident BA. The reality, a simple act of sisterly love, was twisted into a weapon against their bond. Rachel's reports grew bolder with each submission. She began documenting incidents that never occurred, arguments that never happened, manipulation that existed only in her imagination. One particularly damaging report claimed Denise had deliberately sabotaged Brittany's relationships with potential adoptive families before Philip, a complete fabrication that nonetheless found its way into official records. During supervised visits between the girls, Rachel would scrutinize their every interaction, interpreting innocent gestures through a lens of suspicion. When Denise helped Brittany tie her shoelaces, it became fostering unnecessary dependence. Their private jokes were labeled as exclusionary behavior designed to isolate BA from peers and potential adoptive resources. The most damaging allegations centered around Denise's past trauma. Rachel expertly wove together isolated incidents from Denise's early years in the system, creating a narrative that suggested she was emotionally unstable and potentially dangerous. A panic attack from 6 years ago became violent tendencies, while her protective instincts toward Brittany were reframed as obsessive attachment disorder. These reports began circulating through the child welfare system, gaining momentum and credibility with each passing hand. Social workers who had known and trusted Denise for years found themselves questioning their judgments. Even Hope Haven staff members began treating her differently, watching her interactions with Brittany more closely, their trust eroded by Rachel's carefully constructed lies. Philip Mason received carefully selected excerpts from these reports during his meetings with Rachel. Mr. Mason, she would say, her voice filled with manufactured concern, "I feel obligated to share some troubling patterns we've observed." She would then present her evidence, each point designed to make him question the wisdom of maintaining any connection between the girls after adoption. The impact on Denise was devastating. She began noticing the changed attitudes, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, the way other staff members no longer left her alone with younger children. Her confusion turned to hurt, then to anger as she realized her reputation was being systematically destroyed. Eleanor Mitchell attempted to challenge these reports, presenting her own observations of the girls' positive relationship. However, her protests were dismissed as emotionally biased and lacking professional distance. But her decade of experience working with children was deemed irrelevant in the face of Rachel's supposedly scientific documentation. The false reports reached their crescendo when Rachel submitted a comprehensive evaluation recommending immediate separation. She cited escalating concerns about psychological manipulation and potential long-term emotional damage to B.A.'s development. The report was a masterwork of deception, weaving together actual events, misinterpreted interactions, and complete fabrications into a compelling narrative of danger. As evidence mounted in the courtroom, Judge Williams's expression grew increasingly grave. The systematic manipulation of records, the calculated destruction of a sibling bond, and the broader pattern of separation revealed a deeply flawed system that had allowed personal bias to override professional ethics. Dr. Martinez's analysis of the psychological impact of Rachel's actions presented research showing the devastating effects of her campaign. We're looking at hundreds of children who have suffered severe attachment disorders, depression, and trust issues as a direct result of these forced separations, she testified. The trauma inflicted by these actions will affect many of these children for the rest of their lives. The hearing reached its emotional peak when Denise took the stand. Unlike her previous appearances before authorities, where she had been defensive and afraid, she spoke with quiet dignity about her relationship with Brittany. The courtroom fell silent as she described their first meeting, their shared struggles, their dreams of staying together. "I promised to protect her," Denise testified, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "But this isn't just about protection anymore. We make each other better. We make each other whole." She described how Brittany had helped her overcome her own fears, how teaching her sister to read had given her a sense of purpose, how their bond had helped both of them heal from their past traumas. The court watched as Denise pulled out a worn notebook, her daily record of their life together. "Every day for the past 3 years I've written down one moment that made Brittany smile," she explained. "Not because anyone asked me to, but because her happiness became my happiness." She read selected entries, each one revealing the depth of their connection through simple, everyday moments. Eleanor Mitchell presented Brittany's artwork as evidence, showing the progression from her earliest drawings, dark, frightened pieces from when she first arrived at Hope Haven, to the bright, hopeful works she created after bonding with Denise. "Art therapy is one of our most reliable windows into a child's emotional state," Eleanor explained. "These pictures tell the story of healing through love." The most powerful evidence came in the form of testimonies from other children at Hope Haven. 10-year-old Tommy described how Denise and Brittany had helped him overcome his fear of thunderstorms. "They made up this game," he explained, "where every thunder crash meant another angel was bowling in heaven. Now I'm not scared anymore. I help other kids not be scared too, just like they taught me." Sarah, a 12-year-old resident, spoke about how the sisters had created a support system for all the younger children. "They showed us that family isn't just about who your parents are," she testified. "It's about who makes you feel safe and loved. They made Hope Haven feel like home for all of us." Philip's testimony revealed his own transformation. He described his initial motivation for adoption, the desire to replace his lost daughter Sarah, and how watching Denise and Brittany had taught him a deeper truth about family. "I came looking for a replacement," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Instead, I found something more valuable, the chance to help preserve a real family bond, one that formed through choice and love rather than blood." Medical professionals presented evidence of the physical impact of separation on both girls. Dr. Anderson detailed Brittany's decline during her trial stay at Philip's home, her loss of appetite, her withdrawal, her declining health. "The body doesn't lie," she testified. This child was experiencing severe trauma from being separated from her primary attachment figure. The courthouse fell silent as Brittany herself took the stand. Despite her young age, she spoke with remarkable clarity about her bond with Denise. She described the nightmares that had plagued her early days at Hope Haven, how Denise had sat with her night after night, teaching her to be brave. "She didn't just help me stop being scared," Brittany explained. "She showed me how to be strong." Brittany then presented her own evidence, a series of drawings she had created during her stay at Philip's mansion. Each piece showed 2 figures, one always reaching for the other across an ever-widening gap. The progression of these images, growing darker and more desperate over time, provided stark testimony to the emotional impact of forced separation. Perhaps the most unexpected testimony came from Hope Haven's maintenance man, Mr. Jenkins. He described countless small moments he had witnessed over the years: Denise helping Brittany tie her shoes, their shared laughter in the garden, their habit of saving treats for each other. "In 20 years of working at Hope Haven," he said, "I've never seen a more natural family bond. These girls aren't just playing at being sisters, they are sisters in every way that matters." Eleanor concluded the emotional testimonies by presenting years of official documentation showing the positive impact the girls had on each other and the entire Hope Haven community. "We're not just deciding the fate of 2 children today," she reminded the court. We're deciding whether love and healing are less valid because they don't follow traditional patterns. The breaking point in the hearing came unexpectedly through a former colleague of Rachel Thompson who could no longer bear the weight of complicity. Sarah Bennett, a veteran social worker who had worked alongside Rachel for 15 years, requested to address the court with new evidence that would shatter Rachel's professional facade completely. "Your Honor," Sarah began, her voice trembling but determined, "I've spent years watching Rachel systematically destroy sibling relationships based on her personal trauma. What happened with her failed adoption of Amy Peterson 15 years ago wasn't just a professional setback. It became an obsession that warped her entire approach to older children in the system." The courtroom fell silent as Sarah revealed a cache of private emails and unofficial notes that exposed the full extent of Rachel's manipulation. The documents showed a deliberate pattern of targeting sibling groups, where one child was significantly older, using carefully crafted language to make normal protective behaviors appear pathological. She would alter reports, Sarah testified, producing original documents with Rachel's handwritten changes. Simple interactions between siblings would be reframed as concerning patterns. Notes from other professionals that supported keeping siblings together would mysteriously disappear from official files. The evidence revealed a sophisticated system of manipulation. Rachel had created a network of preferred facilities like Riverside Youth Center where older siblings could be efficiently isolated from younger ones. She had developed relationships with sympathetic administrators who would accept her transfers without question, effectively trapping older children in a system designed to separate them from their siblings. Philip's legal team presented a timeline of Rachel's cases, showing how her reports became increasingly hostile towards sibling relationships after her failed adoption experience. The pattern was clear. What had started as personal bias had evolved into a systematic campaign against older foster children maintaining connections with younger siblings. Former Hope Haven employees came forward with stories of being pressured to modify their observations to align with Rachel's assessments. Those who refused found their reports mysteriously missing from official files, their concerns dismissed as unprofessional emotional attachment to their charges. The most damning evidence came from Rachel's own computer files, obtained through legal discovery. Hidden folders contained templates for separation justifications, pre-written assessments that could be easily modified to fit different cases, and a tracking system for monitoring the success of her separations. Dr. Martinez, analyzing the psychological impact of Rachel's actions, presented research showing the devastating effects of her campaign. We're looking at hundreds of children who have suffered severe attachment disorders, depression, and trust issues as a direct result of these forced separations, she testified. The trauma inflicted by these actions will affect many of these children for the rest of their lives. Rachel's composed professional demeanor finally cracked under the weight of the evidence. When confronted with a particularly emotional letter from a separated sibling pair, she burst out, "They don't understand. All the children are damaged. They carry their trauma like a disease. I was trying to protect the younger ones from being infected by their pain." The outburst revealed the deep-seated prejudice driving her actions. Her personal experience with one troubled teenager had led her to view all older foster children as threats to younger ones, regardless of the actual dynamics of their relationships. The court heard testimony from administrative staff who had been coerced into backdating documents and altering records at Rachel's direction. Each revelation added to the picture of a professional who had abused her position to enact a personal vendetta against older foster children. As the evidence mounted, Rachel's final attempt to defend her actions only served to further expose her bias. "I was trying to give these younger children their best chance," she insisted, her voice rising with desperation. How can they have a fresh start when they're tied to siblings who carry the weight of their shared trauma? The courtroom's reaction to this statement was palpable. The deep prejudice, Underlying her words, the assumption that shared trauma was a contaminant rather than a bond revealed how thoroughly her personal experience had corrupted her professional judgment. As Rachel's conspiracy unraveled, the strength of Denise and Brittany's bond stood in stark contrast to her dark view of sibling relationships. Their unity, maintained despite every effort to break it, served as powerful testament to the resilience of family bonds that formed through choice and love, rather than mere circumstance. Judge Robert Williams sat behind his imposing oak desk, his stern expression masking the turmoil within as he prepared to deliver what would become one of the most controversial decisions of his career. Despite the overwhelming evidence of Rachel's misconduct, legal precedent and system regulations presented significant obstacles to Philip's unprecedented request for joint adoption. After careful consideration of all presented evidence, Judge Williams began, his voice echoing through the silent courtroom, "While I find Ms. Thompson's actions deeply troubling and worthy of separate investigation, I am bound by current adoption regulations which prioritize traditional family structures and age-appropriate placements. Therefore, I must initially deny Mr. Mason's petition for joint adoption." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Brittany's small hands gripped Denise's tighter while Philip stood frozen, disbelief etched across his features. Judge Williams raised his hand for silence before continuing to explain his decision, citing specific statutes that made approving such an unusual adoption legally problematic, and the law as currently written, he elaborated, does not adequately address situations where an adult seeks to adopt both an older and younger child who are not biologically related. While Mr. Mason's intentions are admirable, approving such an adoption could set a precedent that our current legal framework is not prepared to support. Eleanor Mitchell, who had been taking notes throughout the proceedings, dropped her pen in frustration. The judge's adherence to regulatory constraints seemed to ignore the human element at the core of the case. Philip's legal team immediately began shuffling papers, preparing for an appeal, while Rachel Thompson's slight smile suggested she felt vindicated despite her exposed misconduct. The judge continued outlining the technical reasons for his decision. He cited concerns about age gaps in adoption, questioned the stability of non-biological sibling bonds, and expressed worry about setting precedents that might complicate future cases. Each point felt like another brick in a wall separating the sisters. Brittany, understanding enough to know things weren't going well, began to cry silently. Denise wrapped her arm around her sister's shoulders, her own face a mask of controlled pain. Their reactions sparked a wave of emotional responses throughout the courtroom, with many observers openly wiping away tears. Philip stood to address the court again, his voice carrying the weight of genuine emotion. "Your Honor, with all due respect, are we not allowing bureaucracy to triumph over humanity? These regulations were created to protect children, not to tear apart existing family bonds." The judge's response was measured but firm. "Mr. Mason, I sympathize with your position, but I cannot simply ignore established legal frameworks. The law must evolve through proper channels, not through emotional appeals in individual cases." However, as Judge Williams observed the devastating impact of his words on the two sisters, something shifted in his expression. He added an unusual addendum to his ruling: "I will delay the final implementation of this decision for 30 days, during which time I strongly encourage Mr. Mason's legal team to petition for emergency amendments to current adoption regulations." This small concession offered a glimmer of hope, but the immediate reality remained harsh. Denise would still face transfer to Riverside Youth Center while any appeals were pending. But the separation that Rachel had engineered would proceed, albeit temporarily, despite all evidence of its harmful nature. The courtroom atmosphere grew heavy with despair as the implications became clear. Philip's legal team huddled in urgent consultation while social workers began discussing immediate transfer arrangements for Denise. The system's machinery was in motion, seemingly unstoppable, despite its obvious flaws. The night before her scheduled transfer to Riverside Youth Center, Denise Evans made a desperate decision. The full moon cast long shadows across Hope Haven's grounds as she silently packed a small backpack with essentials, some clothes, the few dollars she had saved, and most importantly, photos of herself and Brittany. At midnight, when the night staff made their usual rounds, Denise slipped out of her bed, careful not to wake the other girls. She had memorized the guard schedules, knew which floorboards creaked, and had calculated exactly how long it would take to reach the old oak tree where she and Brittany had spent so many happy hours. Her plan was simple but desperate. She would hide in the city, find work somewhere, and somehow maintain contact with Brittany. In her 16-year-old mind, any alternative seemed better than being sent away from her sister. She had left a note on her pillow: "I'm not running away from something, I'm running towards someone. Please understand." As she crept down the hallway, a floorboard creaked unexpectedly. Denise froze, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would give her away. But it wasn't a staff member who emerged from the shadows, it was Brittany, clutching her own hastily packed backpack. "I knew you would try to leave," Brittany whispered, her small face determined in the moonlight. "I'm coming with you. We promised to stay together, remember?" The sight of her 7-year-old sister ready to face the streets rather than be separated brought Denise's plan crashing down around her. Reality hit hard as Denise looked at Brittany's innocent face. How could she protect a 7-year-old on the streets? Where would they sleep? What would they eat? The responsibility of her sister's safety overwhelmed her impulsive plan. But before Denise could respond, lights flooded the hallway. Eleanor Mitchell stood at the end of the corridor, her face a mixture of sadness and understanding. "Oh, my dear girl," she said softly, "I've been expecting this." She had known Denise well enough to anticipate her attempt to escape. What followed was chaos. Other staff members arrived, Rachel Thompson was called in despite the late hour, and Philip Mason was notified. As Denise was led back to her room, she could hear Brittany's protests echoing through the halls. "Don't take her away. Please. We promised to stay together." Rachel Thompson arrived looking triumphant, using the escape attempt as further evidence of Denise's negative influence. She immediately began writing notes, presumably for another damning report. "This proves exactly what I've been saying," she declared. "This kind of desperate behavior is precisely why separation is necessary." Philip Mason arrived just as Denise was being secured in her room under watch. The sight of the teenage girl, defeated and broken, clutching a photo of herself and Brittany, hit him harder than he expected. This wasn't the action of a troubled teen with attachment issues. This was a sister trying desperately to keep her family together. Eleanor Mitchell stood guard outside Denise's room that night, not to prevent another escape attempt, but to protect her from Rachel's attempts to interview her in her vulnerable state. Through the door, she could hear Denise's muffled sobs, each one a testament to the pain of impending separation. As dawn broke, Hope Haven was quiet except for the sound of a transport van arriving from Riverside Youth Center. Denise sat on her bed, no longer crying, her face set in a mask of resignation. Her failed escape attempt had not only failed to prevent the separation, but had given Rachel more ammunition against her. The tragedy wasn't just in the failed escape, but in the systemic failure that had driven a responsible, caring teenager to such desperate measures. As Denise was led to the transport van, the weight of defeat was visible in every step. Her last glimpse of Hope Haven would be Brittany's face pressed against a window, their separation now inevitable, despite their desperate attempt to prevent it. The day after Denise's transfer, Brittany's emotional state deteriorated rapidly. Her small body, already weakened from the previous hunger strike, began to show signs of severe stress. The normally vibrant child became a ghost of herself, wandering the halls of Hope Haven like a lost soul. During morning classes, Brittany collapsed while trying to complete a simple art project, her first attempt at drawing since Denise's departure. The school nurse found her temperature dangerously high, her body finally surrendering to the combined effects of emotional trauma and physical exhaustion. Within hours, she was rushed to Boston Children's Hospital. The emergency room doctors diagnosed severe dehydration, malnutrition, and acute stress response. Her vital signs were unstable, her small body fighting against the overwhelming emotional and physical strain. The attending physician, Dr. Sarah Anderson, noted in her report patient exhibits symptoms consistent with severe emotional trauma manifesting in dangerous physical deterioration. Philip Mason arrived at the hospital to find Brittany connected to various monitors and IVs delivering essential fluids to her depleted system. The sight of her tiny form lost in the hospital bed struck him with the full weight of his role in this tragedy. Her artwork, which had once been so full of color and life, now lay untouched on her bedside table, the papers as blank as her expression. "She's experiencing what we call an acute stress response," Dr. Anderson explained to Philip. "Her body is literally shutting down in response to emotional trauma. Children her age shouldn't have to endure this level of psychological distress." The doctor's words carried an implicit criticism of the system that had allowed this to happen. At night, the hospital staff reported hearing Brittany calling out for Denise in her sleep. Her nightmares became so severe that sedation was eventually necessary to allow her body the rest it desperately needed. The nurses noted that she would clutch a worn photograph of herself and Denise even in her medicated sleep. Rachel Thompson attempted to visit, clipboard in hand, presumably to document this latest development. The hospital staff, led by Dr. Anderson, firmly denied her access to Brittany's room. "This child needs healing, not documentation," the doctor stated firmly, placing herself between Rachel and the hospital room door. Eleanor Mitchell spent her free hours at Brittany's bedside, reading the stories that Denise used to read to her sister. The familiar words seemed to have a calming effect, though Brittany remained largely unresponsive. Each story was a painful reminder of what had been torn away from this already traumatized child. Child psychiatrist Dr. James Bennett was brought in to evaluate Brittany's mental state. His assessment was damning. Patient exhibits symptoms of severe attachment disruption trauma. The forced separation from her primary emotional support has created a psychological crisis that manifests in physical symptoms. Philip, watching Brittany's continuing decline, finally reached his breaking point in the sterile hospital corridor. He confronted Rachel Thompson, who had returned for another attempt to document the situation. "Are you satisfied now?" he demanded. "Is this enough proof of the damage you've caused?" Rachel's only response was to make another note in her ever-present file. Days passed, and while Brittany's physical condition stabilized somewhat, her emotional state remained fragile. She would spend hours staring out the hospital window as if searching for someone in the distance. The child psychologist noted that her drawings, when she could be convinced to attempt them, showed only broken hearts and separated figures. A particularly heartbreaking moment came when Brittany, in a brief moment of lucidity, asked Philip a question that cut to the heart of the matter. If love is supposed to be good, why does it hurt so much? The question left him speechless, confronting the fundamental cruelty of a system that could turn a child's capacity for love into a source of such profound suffering. The story of Denise and Brittany broke in the Boston Globe on a Sunday morning, the headline reading "Separated Sisters, the Hidden Cost of Foster Care Politics." Within hours, the article went viral, touching hearts and igniting outrage across social media platforms. Local news stations picked up the story, featuring interviews with former Hope Haven residents who shared similar experiences of forced separation. The image of Brittany in her hospital bed, clutching a photo of Denise, became a powerful symbol of a system that prioritized procedure over human connection. A grassroots movement emerged almost overnight to keep sisters together. It started trending on social media, with thousands sharing their own stories of sibling separation in the foster care system. Former foster children, adoptive parents, and child welfare advocates began organizing protests outside the county courthouse. Community leaders stepped forward to support the cause. Local church groups organized prayer vigils outside Hope Haven, while university students staged peaceful demonstrations at Riverside Youth Center. The City Council announced an emergency session to review foster care policies regarding sibling relationships. Philip's corporate connections proved invaluable as business leaders joined the campaign. CEOs wrote open letters supporting reform, and several major companies offered to establish scholarship funds for older foster children seeking adoption. The corporate pressure added weight to the growing demand for systemic change. Local artists created a mural on a downtown building depicting Denise and Brittany's story, their joined hands stretching across the wall as a symbol of unbreakable bonds. The artwork became a gathering point for supporters and a powerful visual representation of the movement's message. Professional organizations began speaking out. The American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry issued a statement about the psychological importance of maintaining sibling bonds in foster care. Child welfare experts published opinion pieces challenging the practice of separating siblings for convenience. The media attention reached its peak when a national morning show featured Amy Peterson sharing her story about Rachel Thompson, alongside interviews with other victims of similar separations. The broadcast sparked a nationwide conversation about reform in the foster care system. Support poured in from unexpected places. A group of retired judges formed an advocacy committee to review similar cases and propose legislative changes. Law firms offered pro bono services to help reunite separated siblings, and mental health professionals volunteered counseling services. The groundswell of public support transformed the narrative from a single case into a movement for systemic change. What had begun as one family's struggle became a catalyst for examining how the foster care system approached sibling relationships and older child adoption. Through it all, Philip worked tirelessly to channel the public attention constructively. He established a foundation dedicated to supporting sibling groups in foster care, ensuring that the momentum would continue beyond his daughter's case. The community's response demonstrated that Denise and Brittany's story had touched a deep chord in the public consciousness. Their struggle highlighted universal themes about family, love, and the human need for connection that transcended the specific details of their case. As public pressure mounted, even those who had initially supported Rachel's position began to reconsider. The wave of personal stories and expert testimony made it increasingly difficult to defend policies that treated sibling relationships as disposable conveniences rather than essential bonds. The media spotlight and community support created an environment where change seemed not just possible but inevitable. What had started as one man's fight to adopt two sisters had evolved into a movement that would reshape how society viewed and valued sibling relationships in foster care. Sitting in the dimly lit hospital room watching Brittany's restless sleep, Philip Mason experienced an epiphany that would fundamentally change his perspective on family and love. The steady beeping of medical monitors provided a rhythm to his thoughts as he confronted the truth he had been avoiding. He pulled out his wallet and looked at the worn photo of Sarah, his lost daughter, that he always carried. For the first time, he saw clearly how his grief had colored his initial intentions with Brittany. He had been seeking to replace what was lost, to recreate a family that could never truly be restored. "I've been so blind," he whispered to himself, watching Brittany's chest rise and fall with each troubled breath. He realized that his focus on recreating his lost family had made him complicit in destroying another. The irony struck him hard. In his attempt to heal his own pain, he had contributed to inflicting similar pain on two innocent souls. The realization deepened as he recalled Brittany's artwork from her early days at his mansion. She had always drawn two figures, never one, but he had chosen to see only what he wanted to see. Her art hadn't been incomplete, it had been telling a truth he refused to acknowledge. A nurse entered to check Brittany's vitals, commenting on how the child seemed to breathe easier when holding the photo of herself and Denise. Something about this simple observation broke through Philip's final defenses. Family wasn't about replacing what was lost, it was about opening your heart to new love while honoring what came before. He thought about Sarah, really thought about her, for the first time in years. His daughter had always wanted a sister, had dreamed of sharing her room, her toys, her life with a sibling. Would she have wanted him to separate two sisters who had found each other against all odds? The monitors beeped steadily as Philip made his way to the window, looking out at the Boston skyline. His mansion, which he had so carefully prepared for one child, suddenly seemed emptier than ever. He had been trying to fill it with a replacement when what it really needed was to become a home for a new kind of family. Eleanor Mitchell found him there hours later, still standing by the window. "You know," she said gently, "sometimes the families we choose are stronger than the ones we're born into." Her words crystallized everything Philip had been feeling. He turned to face her, his decision already made. "I've been trying to recreate the past instead of building a future," he admitted. "These girls don't need someone to separate them or to make them into something they're not. They need someone to protect their bond, to give them a place where they can grow together." Looking at Brittany's sleeping form, Philip saw not just a child who reminded him of Sarah, but a complete person with her own needs, her own love, and her own family bonds. The realization brought both pain and liberation: pain at recognizing his earlier blindness, and liberation in finally seeing the truth. "Sarah would have loved them both," he said softly, touching his daughter's photo one last time before putting it away. This wasn't about replacing her, it was about honoring her memory by opening his heart to love in a new way. The breakthrough came unexpectedly through Amy Peterson, the very teenager whose failed adoption 15 years ago had triggered Rachel Thompson's crusade against older foster children. Now 31, Amy arrived at Philip's office clutching a folder of old documents that would expose the dark truth behind Rachel's actions. "I need to tell you what really happened," Amy began, her hands trembling as she spread photographs and letters across Philip's desk. "Rachel Thompson didn't fail to adopt me. I escaped from her. What she's doing to Denise and other teenagers, she tried to do to me first." The documents revealed a disturbing pattern. Rachel's home had been less a sanctuary than a prison where Amy's every move was monitored and controlled. Letters Amy had written describing her treatment had never reached authorities, intercepted and hidden away by Rachel herself. "She was obsessed with fixing me," Amy explained, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "Every connection to my past, especially my younger sister in another foster home, was seen as a contamination that needed to be eliminated. When I refused to cut ties with my sister, things got ugly." Among Amy's documents were Rachel's personal journals from that period, obtained through years of legal battles. The entries revealed a mindset that had grown increasingly paranoid and controlling. Rachel had convinced herself that older foster children were irreparably damaged and that her mission was to protect younger ones from their influence. Philip's investigators quickly connected the dots between Amy's experience and Rachel's subsequent career choices. Every separation she had engineered, every transfer she had arranged, followed the same pattern as her attempted control of Amy. The tactics she had failed to perfect with one teenager had been refined and systematized in her professional role. The most damning evidence came from Rachel's private correspondence with Riverside Youth Center. Emails revealed that she had specifically chosen the facility for its strict policies limiting outside contact. She had been deliberately sending older siblings there, knowing they would effectively disappear from their younger siblings' lives. Amy's testimony painted a picture of Rachel's methods that exactly matched what was happening with Denise. She starts by isolating the older child, Amy explained. Then she documents every reaction to that isolation as proof of instability. It's a perfect trap. The more you fight to maintain your relationships, the more she uses that fight against you. Eleanor Mitchell, listening to Amy's story, recognized the same tactics being used at Hope Haven. "She's been doing this right under our noses," Eleanor realized. Every time we saw devotion between siblings, she was seeing contamination. Every protective instinct was reframed as control. The revelation of Rachel's personal vendetta transformed the legal landscape of the case. This wasn't just about one social worker's prejudice. It was about a systematic abuse of power driven by unresolved trauma and a distorted mission to protect that actually caused harm. Philip's legal team quickly moved to have all of Rachel's previous cases reviewed. The pattern they uncovered was staggering: dozens of older siblings transferred to restrictive facilities, hundreds of relationships severed, all justified by reports that echoed Rachel's experience with Amy. As Amy finished sharing her story, she pulled out one final document, a photo of herself with her sister, taken recently at her sister's wedding. "We found each other again," she said, "but it took 15 years. Some siblings never do. This has to stop." As the truth about Rachel's systematic separation of siblings came to light, the community response grew from quiet support to determined action. Local newspapers began running a series of investigative articles examining similar cases across the state. Reporters uncovered a pattern of siblings being separated under questionable circumstances, all bearing Rachel's distinctive documentation style. Former foster children began organizing support groups and advocacy networks. They shared stories of forced separations, of lost connections, of years spent searching for siblings. Their testimonies painted a devastating picture of lives fractured by a system that prioritized convenience over family bonds. The Hope Haven staff, emboldened by the revelations, started speaking out. Night supervisors described how they had witnessed countless tearful goodbyes between siblings. Kitchen workers recalled how children would save portions of their meals for brothers and sisters they feared they might never see again. Each story added to the mounting evidence of systemic failure. Local religious leaders and community organizations joined forces to create the Forever Family Initiative, a program dedicated to supporting sibling groups in foster care. They offered transportation assistance for siblings placed in different facilities, organized supervised visits, and provided legal advocacy for families fighting separation. Social workers from other districts began reviewing their own cases, looking for similar patterns. Many came forward with stories of feeling pressured to separate siblings, of being told that clean breaks were best for younger children. The revelations sparked a broader conversation about reform in child welfare practices. The academic community contributed research supporting the importance of maintaining sibling bonds. Studies showed better outcomes for children who remained connected to their siblings, challenging the notion that separation led to better adjustment. Universities offered their resources to track and document cases of forced separation. Eleanor Mitchell organized a database of separated siblings, working with volunteer researchers to help reconnect families torn apart by the system. The project quickly expanded as more cases came to light. Social media became a powerful tool, with dedicated groups helping siblings find each other after years of separation. Local businesses showed their support in practical ways. Law firms offered pro bono services to families fighting separation orders. Tech companies developed apps to help siblings maintain contact across distance. Transportation companies provided free passes for siblings to visit each other. The arts community joined the cause, creating powerful visual representations of the separated families' stories. A local theater group developed a play based on testimonies from former foster children, bringing their experiences to life for audiences across the city. Art galleries hosted exhibitions featuring work by children affected by separation. Medical professionals began documenting the physical and emotional impact of sibling separation. Pediatricians reported increased rates of anxiety and depression in separated children. Mental health experts provided testimony about the long-term trauma caused by forced separation. At Hope Haven, the children organized their own form of protest. They created a wall of remembrance, covering it with photos and stories of siblings who had been separated. Each new addition strengthened their resolve to prevent future separations and inspired more people to join the cause. The movement gained momentum as more professionals within the system began questioning established practices. Judges started looking more critically at recommendations for separation. Social workers developed new protocols emphasizing family preservation. Foster parents advocated for keeping sibling groups together. The mounting evidence and community pressure finally forced the child welfare system to confront its flaws. In an unprecedented move, the State Department of Children's Services announced a comprehensive review of all sibling separation cases from the past decade. The investigation would focus particularly on cases where Rachel Thompson's recommendations had influenced decisions. High-ranking officials began making public statements acknowledging the system's failure to protect sibling relationships. The Commissioner of Child Services held a press conference, admitting that policies had prioritized administrative convenience over children's emotional well-being. "We lost sight of our primary mission," she stated. "We focused so much on finding placements that we forgot about preserving families." Internal audits revealed shocking statistics. Hundreds of siblings had been separated without proper justification. The review found a pattern of manipulated reports, ignored appeals, and systematic bias against older children in foster care. Each discovery added to the growing consensus that fundamental reform was necessary. The State Board of Child Welfare convened an emergency session to revise its policies on sibling placement. New guidelines were drafted emphasizing the preservation of sibling bonds as a primary consideration in all placement decisions. The board also established an independent oversight committee to review future separation recommendations. Professional organizations began updating their standards of practice. The National Association of Social Workers issued new guidelines specifically addressing sibling relationships in foster care. Training programs were developed to help social workers better understand and support sibling bonds. The judicial system also responded to the revelations. The state Supreme Court issued an advisory opinion emphasizing the legal rights of siblings in foster care. Lower courts were instructed to give greater weight to maintaining sibling relationships when considering placement decisions. Legal reforms were proposed to strengthen protections for sibling groups. New legislation would require clear and compelling evidence before siblings could be separated, and would mandate regular contact between separated siblings. The proposed laws also included provisions for sibling visitation rights and resources to support joint placement. The system's acknowledgement extended to practical changes. Budget allocations were revised to provide additional support for homes willing to accept sibling groups. Training programs were established to help foster parents understand the importance of maintaining sibling connections. Resources were dedicated to facilitating regular contact between separated siblings. Perhaps most significantly, the department created a new position, sibling relationship advocate. This role would focus specifically on protecting and supporting sibling bonds within the foster care system. The position's first appointment was Eleanor Mitchell, whose years of documentation had helped expose the system's flaws. Hope Haven became a model for new practices in sibling care. Its success in keeping siblings together, despite earlier pressures to separate them, provided valuable lessons for other facilities. The staff's methods of supporting sibling relationships were studied and replicated across the state. The acknowledgement of systemic failure brought both pain and hope. Pain in recognizing how many families had been unnecessarily torn apart, and hope that future generations would be better protected. As one official noted, sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal our deepest flaws, but it also shows us the path to healing. The county courthouse was packed to capacity on the morning of Judge Williams' final ruling. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting a warm glow over the assembled crowd. Brittany, released from the hospital but still looking fragile, sat between Philip and Eleanor, while Denise, brought back from Riverside Youth Center, tried to maintain her composure despite her obvious exhaustion. Judge Williams entered the courtroom with deliberate steps, his face bearing the gravity of a decision that would reshape lives and potentially change the system itself. The rustling of papers and whispered conversations died away as he took his seat, the entire room holding its breath. In light of new evidence and careful reconsideration, he began, his voice clear and strong, "I am reversing my previous ruling. Furthermore, I am approving Mr. Philip Mason's petition for joint adoption of both Brittany Adams and Denise Evans." The silence broke into a wave of emotion. Brittany leapt from her seat, rushing to embrace Denise despite the bailiff's half-hearted attempt to maintain decorum. Their tears of joy mingled as they held each other, finally secure in the knowledge that no one could separate them again. Philip moved to join his daughters, now officially his daughters, his own eyes glistening with tears. The three of them formed a circle, their embrace representing the new family they had become. Eleanor Mitchell watched from her seat, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, her years of advocacy finally vindicated. Rachel Thompson was notably absent, having been suspended pending investigation. Her empty chair served as a symbol of the old system that had prioritized rules over relationships, policy over people. The judge continued, his words carrying historic weight. This case has revealed serious flaws in how we evaluate sibling relationships in foster care. Love does not always follow traditional patterns, and our system must evolve to recognize and protect bonds that form through choice as well as blood. As he spoke, Brittany pulled out her sketchbook, the first time she had drawn since Denise's transfer. With quick, sure strokes, she began creating a new picture, three figures holding hands under a bright sun, their smiles radiating joy. It was the first time she had drawn herself with more than one other person. The judge's final words resonated through the courtroom. Family is not defined by biology alone, nor by traditional structures. It is defined by love, commitment, and the bonds that form when hearts choose to beat as one. Let this ruling stand as recognition of that truth. The transition from Hope Haven to Philip's mansion unfolded like the opening chapters of a new book. This time, both sisters moved together, their belongings mingling in the back of Philip's car as they drove toward their new home. The mansion that had once felt empty and imposing to Brittany now seemed to welcome them with open arms. Philip had transformed Sarah's old playroom into an art studio for both girls, with two easels standing side by side near the window. The walls, once a shrine to loss, now displayed both Sarah's preserved artwork and empty spaces waiting to be filled with new memories. It was a perfect metaphor for their family honoring the past while embracing the future. The first night in their new home, the sisters shared Brittany's room, neither quite ready for separation even in sleep. Philip found them in the morning, curled together like quotation marks, their faces peaceful for the first time in weeks. He quietly closed the door, understanding that healing would happen in its own time. Days melted into weeks as they established new routines. Breakfast became a time for sharing dreams from the night before, with Philip learning to interpret the sisters' private language of inside jokes and half-finished sentences. Denise discovered a talent for cooking, while Brittany filled the house with increasingly colorful artwork. The transformation was most visible in their art. Brittany's drawings evolved from separated figures to vibrant family scenes, always featuring three people together. Denise, inspired by her sister, began writing stories to accompany the artwork, their creative collaboration filling the mansion with new energy. School presentations became family events, with both girls attending each other's performances and Philip beaming proudly from the audience. Teachers noted the positive changes in both sisters, Brittany's grades improving as her anxiety decreased, Denise's natural leadership qualities emerging as she felt secure in her new role. Philip learned to navigate the delicate balance of being both authority figure and healing presence. He discovered that sometimes the best parenting happened in quiet moments, helping with homework, listening to their stories, or simply being present while they worked through their remaining fears. The mansion's gardens became their special project, with each family member choosing plants to grow. Denise planted protective rows of sunflowers, while Brittany created a rainbow of wildflowers. Philip added a bench beneath the property's oldest oak tree, recognizing their need for a place similar to their spot at Hope Haven. Therapy sessions continued, but now as a family unit. They learned to talk about Sarah, about the pain of separation, about their fears and hopes. Through these conversations, they built a stronger foundation, understanding that their new family was built on choice, love, and mutual healing. 1 year after the adoption, Philip Mason stood at a podium in the newly renovated community center. announcing the launch of the Forever Sisters Foundation. Beside him, Denise and Brittany held hands, their presence a testament to the power of love over bureaucracy, of family bonds over system constraints. The Foundation's mission was clear: to protect and support sibling relationships in foster care. Its first initiative provided legal assistance to families seeking to adopt sibling groups, ensuring that no other children would face the battle they had endured. Philip had dedicated a significant portion of his fortune to this cause, turning their personal victory into hope for others. The program expanded rapidly, establishing support groups for separated siblings, funding research into the importance of maintaining family bonds, and creating advocacy networks to challenge outdated policies. Denise, despite her young age, became a powerful speaker at Foundation events, her story inspiring others to fight for their own families. Brittany's artwork became the Foundation's symbol, a simple drawing of two hands clasped together, representing the unbreakable bond between siblings. Her piece is now hung in foster care offices across the state, silent reminders of what was truly at stake in every decision about sibling placement. Eleanor Mitchell joined the Foundation's board of directors, bringing decades of experience and wisdom to their mission. Under her guidance, they developed training programs for social workers, emphasizing the importance of preserving sibling relationships and recognizing the different forms family love can take. The impact rippled outward. State legislators began reviewing policies on sibling separation, using the Mason case as a catalyst for reform. Other states followed suit, recognizing that the best interests of children often meant keeping siblings together, regardless of age differences or traditional adoption preferences. But Rachel Thompson's case led to a broader investigation of similar practices nationwide. The revelation of her vendetta sparked a movement to ensure that personal bias couldn't override professional judgment in child welfare decisions. Her actions, though damaging, ultimately led to stronger protections for foster children. The Foundation's most powerful work happened in quiet moments, reuniting long-separated siblings, supporting joint adoptions, and creating spaces where foster children could maintain their family bonds. Each success story added to the growing evidence that love in all its forms deserved protection and respect. On the anniversary of their adoption, the Mason family gathered in their garden under the oak tree that had become their own special place. Denise, now preparing for college but determined to stay close to home, and Brittany, blossoming into a talented young artist, sat with Philip as the sun set. "Do you know what I've learned?" Philip asked, watching his daughters with pride. "Family isn't about replacing what's lost or fitting into someone else's mold. It's about making room in your heart for new love while honoring the bonds that already exist." The message of their story spread far beyond their community. It spoke to universal truths about the nature of family, the power of perseverance, and the importance of fighting for what matters most. Their journey showed that sometimes the most beautiful families are formed not through biology or bureaucracy, but through choice and love. The Forever Sisters Foundation became more than just an organization. It became a symbol of hope, a reminder that change is possible when people stand together for what's right. Through their work, countless other sibling groups found the support they needed to stay together or reunite after separation. Eleanor Mitchell's voice captured the moment perfectly as she watched them leave. "Sometimes the families we choose are the ones that teach us the most about love." The sisters' journey had not just ended in victory, it had opened the door for countless others to follow. The transition from Hope Haven to Philip's mansion unfolded like the opening chapters of a new book. This time both sisters moved together, their belongings mingling in the back of Philip's car as they drove toward their new home. The mansion that had once felt empty and imposing to Brittany now seemed to welcome them with open arms. Philip had transformed Sarah's old playroom into an art studio for both girls, with two easels standing side by side near the window. The walls, once a shrine to loss, now displayed both Sarah's preserved artwork and new pieces created by both sisters, a visual testament to how love can grow and change while still honoring what came before. Their story became a beacon of hope for others facing similar struggles. It demonstrated that justice, while sometimes slow, could prevail when enough people stood together for what was right. More importantly, it showed that family bonds, whether formed by birth or choice, deserve protection and respect. In the end, their victory wasn't just about keeping two sisters together. It was about changing how society viewed and valued family relationships. It proved that love doesn't always follow traditional patterns, that healing can come in unexpected forms, and that sometimes the families we choose are as strong as the ones we're born into. As their story continues to inspire others, one truth remains clear: family is not defined by blood or legal documents, but by the connections we forge through love, understanding, and unwavering support. The Mason family stands as living proof that when we open our hearts to new possibilities, we can create something beautiful from even the most challenging circumstances. Their journey from tragedy to triumph reminds us all that sometimes the most profound changes begin with a simple act of love, like a teenage girl comforting her scared little sister, or a grieving father learning to open his heart again. In the end, it's these moments of connection that truly define what it means to be a family. If this story of sisterly love and triumph touched your heart, we invite you to join our storytelling community. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your voice matters in this conversation about family, love, and justice. Support our team's mission to bring more inspiring stories by subscribing to our channel and spreading hope by sharing this video with friends and family. Every like helps us reach more people with messages of love and resilience. Together we can continue celebrating the power of unconditional love and the true meaning of family. Thank you for being part of our journey.